When I was in high school, news that the Lord of the Rings trilogy was going to be made into a real movie trilogy came to pass. I had read The Hobbit, which was the prequel to that trilogy, when I was younger, but I hadn't really ever felt the need to read The Lord of the Rings itself. That was until the movies were going to be released. My brother had an extra copy on his shelf, and so I decided at that moment I was going to read through the entire trilogy before the movies were made. What I discovered was a massive, engaging tale of myth, ancient mysteries, an adventure tale that talks about the dangers of technology, the importance of simple comforts, the necessity of growing up, the importance of standing your ground, and how important it is to take chances. This story seemed to resonate greatly with me, as it had many people who had read it before. There seemed to be universal themes running throughout the story, and ideas that seemed tied to this ancient history that had shaped the entire world of Middle-earth. And of course, my feelings about it were confirmed. J.R.R. Tolkien had actually spent a lot of his time when he was younger putting together stories that stitched together the mythos in his mind of the Lord of the Rings history. In this mythos, which was dubbed the Silmarillion by Tolkien's son, the entirety of the history of that universe had been laid out. While the Silmarillion was not completed in a narrative form until 1977, you could feel the weight and the history throughout Middle-earth in the Lord of the Rings story. From the creation of the Rings of Power to the naming of Aragorn, the history of Gondor, the story was much more compelling because of this rich lore. Another story that we know, of course, is Star Wars, created by George Lucas. It's one of our core modern myths of our time. George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars, was also an avid student of the writings of Joseph Campbell, a professor who created the study of comparative mythology. Campbell described in his writings the idea of a monomyth, or journey of the hero, the common template of nearly all successful human stories, myths, and literature. Lucas decided to use this formula of creating a mythos around the universe of Star Wars, in fact, creating the story of Luke Starkiller throughout his entire life, instead of just one moment in time. While Starkiller would eventually morph into Skywalker, it was clear that both Lucas and Tolkien had grounded their adventure stories on lore and myth. This aided in the ability of the story to impact us and to make the world feel more real while we were on the adventure. But why the heck am I talking about all of this in a Destiny 2 season review? Because at the end of the day, the adventure that we are on and the things that we do are the most important thing, even if they are set on a foundation of the past. The lore is only part of the story, and I think that that is what Bungie has forgotten in Season of the Worthy. Even though we start Season of the Worthy with the Almighty and actually end with the Almighty as well, this season is really only about one thing from a story point of view, and that's Rasputin, the last Warmind. Rasputin's story is one of those most mysterious and curious parts of Destiny lore. I'm going to be describing him as a he because that's what Anna Bray says. She also calls him Big Red, which I actually do kind of like. He is one of the last remnants of humanity during the Golden Age. He's also the only entity, if you want to consider him to be living or not, which actually saw the collapse happen. His story should be one that carries the weight of myth, much like J.R.R. Tolkien's world or Joseph Campbell's monomyth. Instead, the community did not feel connected to Rasputin at all. And what's crazy about this is that the lore for this season is amazing. We find out about all their parts, about the history of Siva, why Rasputin activated it. We find out about Felwinter and Fell Springs. We find out more about the Iron Lords. There were so many opportunities to do so many amazing things, and I just felt like it was too many swings and equally as many misses. I did not feel connected to the story of Rasputin one bit because of this. Let's actually get into what this season offered in terms of content loops, which is mainly what Destiny is driven by. The first loop of Season of the Worthy was the realization that the remnants of the Red Legion, man, are we still talking about them? Have pitched the Almighty on a crash course for Earth. Of course, the only option that we have is to work with Rasputin, mostly because Anna says we should, but it's also because Rasputin is the last Warmind and has access to crazy Golden Age tech, so it's our interest to get to know Rasputin better. It's also interesting that Zavala changes his mind during this time and learns to trust Rasputin, who at one time he had viewed as an enemy. So, how do we interact with Rasputin? How do we learn his story, the last Warmind, the keeper of the Golden Age? We throw balls at him and get loot and kill a bunch of enemies repeatedly. That's it. Let's talk about the Seraph Tower event, because that's actually the core loop that we went through. In all ways, it's one of the worst PvE activities in the history of the game. First of all, it's absolutely boring in its scope because it's the sum of two recycled activities, namely the Forges from the Black Armory and the Spire of Stars raid. The ball throwing mechanic, while much more interesting than just, hey, we're gonna stand on a plate, the ball throwing mechanic is 3 years old if you count the Vosik encounter in the Wrath of the Machine raid. I actually at one point in my videos said that it's not content because it's just a simple basic mechanic from every other PvE activity. There's no reason to count it as something that is new. Next, Bungie had again made an activity that is really only completable flawlessly by having 3 separate fire teams of 3 in an instance. If we can't load up into the world with a group of friends to complete an activity, a la the menagerie, it's another barrier to doing an activity that we may or may not already want to do. I actually didn't even do many of these towers. Instead, I leveled up my EDZ bunker until I could get all my Warmind bits from Crucible and got almost all my bits from that. Bungie needs to get over the fairy tale idea that Guardians are going to just magically meet up in public spaces and fire teams and work together on this. From their data, they know that there are too many solo players to get into an instance like that. It's not a thing. And while some players have and can stop by and help out with these public events, most people who want to complete this event flawlessly for the Almighty Seal or title, you have to get 3 tentpole players, aka solo players, into an instance, invite other players to that instance, totaling 9, 3 fire teams of 3, complete the encounter once, and then get the heck out, or if they're nice, let 3 other folks set up another group there so they can just rinse and repeat and get that thing done. These large-scale public events need to stop. They don't work. Or if you could make it work, it's an anomaly, not the default. Unlike something like Phantasy Star Universe or World of Warcraft, there's just no incentive to do it. You get a little bit of loot and things like that that you would actually get from the season pass or the bunkers anyway. There's no story progression tied to the Seraph Towers either, and I just think that it takes too much time for it to actually be completed. Of all the things that they need to learn from this season, Seraph Towers and their models need to be removed from Destiny, or at least massively reworked. On that note, here's some suggestions. If you're going to make an activity like this, make it a 9-man matchmaking activity. Are you kidding me? I have a lot of friends that would do this. You may need to let more than 3 people into a fire team. This is something that you're going to need to do if you're going to have events like this. This would be awesome, to be fair. I think that'd be a lot of fun. The other thing you can do is let players choose the difficulty that they get into. Use Warmind bits to essentially charge Rasputin at a certain point, kind of like we have the Tears of Light inside of the Blind Well. Place the towers in different locations that instances spawn in. For example, if you went to Io, no one would get their loop taken care of there because trying to get an instance set up there was nearly impossible. Why? Because the NPC Asher Mir was in Io, and that area was very tough for people to set up an instance because a lot of solo players just wanted to go to the bunker and level up their stuff. No one wanted to help with the public event. Also, you need to make it enticing. You either need to tie story content or maybe lore to it. Put the core loop for earning weapons into this activity. Instead, I basically farmed bounties or used the season pass, and I got all my god roll weapons from this season. P.S. The weapons for this season were lackluster at best, even with the very cool and well-designed Warmind mods. If they had bumped up how well those Warmind mods could work, because they really were kind of ineffective, especially in high-end content, I think that that's another thing that they could have done to make this better. Next up, we have the Almighty. Why didn't we go back to the Almighty and do some missions there? To be fair, the best mission in vanilla Destiny 2 was not the fight with Gaul at the end. The best mission by far, with the best music, the best action, the best story, is on the Almighty during the 1AU mission. It was fantastic. I remember hearing the music going down the pipes while the sun was across in the background. It was such a cool story experiences, and man, this was a wasted opportunity. We could have gotten a chance to place targeting locators or sensors on the Almighty, maybe using the 1AU assets, and then you would have had more of a connection with the Rasputin story and the Almighty. I argue that this is something that you could have been able to do maybe once per week per character and get a piece of sweet loot. And it would have been a nice way to learn more about the Red Legion and the Almighty in general. You could have put either collectibles there, something that you could maybe access later on. These are some ways to improve the storytelling and engagement in the future. Give us a cool reward for doing something new in the game. Use the assets and basically have us go back. Man, that would have been awesome. I loved that mission. Using the Almighty as content would have been a lot better than what we really had this season, and that was the bunkers. Now, the bunkers weren't a complete failure, but there was really no weight or interest in clearing these areas. We as a community learned that it was just a daily check-in mechanic, and the community quickly lost interest, only clearing them out when they had to. One of the cool things about it was using an upgraded Valkyrie or maybe using a robot, but it's telling that Bungie even thought that this was a waste of time because they allowed you after a certain period of time to pay the bunker to clear itself and not have to do it. Anytime you can pay to not do an activity in the game and to not play it, it tells you that that content is not worthwhile in the game. Instead, maybe try this. There are cool doors all the way throughout the bunkers. Why not open one door a day or a week or some type of time and give us lore cards based on information on doing that? Maybe have a maze inside of each of the bunkers with a secret emblem or collectible. Maybe we access a computer terminal a la, the Fallout series or BioShock. This is another way to tell us Rasputin's story through the holographics, and frankly could have been a cool way to let us know more about the history of Siva, Felwinter, and Rasputin. Let's talk about the Felwinter's Lie quest, because there were some awesome things that came of that and also some things that were not so awesome. The two main pain points of this quest are pretty clear to most in the community. They made the Seraph Tower event the keystone event, and none of the community really enjoyed it, or if they did, it was a very small minority. And of course, we have the door. Never before in a game, at least to my knowledge, had a major part of the community actually desire to have this event fail as a mutiny, as a protest statement against such content. It was another farm this thing as a community, which was actually kind of cool in Season of the Dawn. But to have it so soon after, it was a mess. I've already talked about ways to make the Seraph Towers and bunkers better, so we're going to price ahead. But of course, the door incident helped the quest fall right on its face. But the final ending for the community of the Felwinter's quest was pretty awesome. Hearing the story about Rasputin as a safety AI going down into the bunker, hearing the Tyrant Sun holographic pieces was one of the highlights of the season, and I really enjoyed it. On that note, I think that the idea of having a weapon like a pinnacle weapon or an exotic weapon and having lore that unlocks as you used it, every weapon that is like that should have that. That is really cool. Now, I know that Luna's, Redrick's has those things, but every weapon from now on, whether it's Wendigo or any kind of pinnacle weapon, should have some story attached to it. And the more you use it, the more you unlock the lore. That is really cool. Finally, the season ended with the destruction of the Almighty in the tower, and man, I really enjoyed that. Bungie took a chance on something, and frankly, I think it worked. You literally had Destiny 2 trending on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube by literally having everyone stare at the sun in the tower. It was one of the coolest things that I've seen in this game to date, and one of the reasons why I still have hope for the franchise. While it was excellent, it was not perfect. I think the event could have been pared down to 30 to 45 minutes, even if that wasn't realistic with the distances that missiles or the Valkyries were traveling in space. I know that I had a lot of people in my stream talking about how they had to go to work or take care of kids, and they'd actually moved appointments based on timetables that they saw Bungie put out. They saw that there was going to be an event at this time, and they put that on their calendar. If you're going to put something like that on the calendar, don't expect people to stay for more than an hour. I was hoping that something changes in the world, because this is a huge thing that happens. I know that in Fortnite, not exactly what I want to be using as a reference right now, but hey, here we are. The world completely changed once that world event happened. As far as I know, the only thing that has changed is there is a little rubble at the tower, and that was it. I am reserving judgment specifically on that, because maybe Season of the Arrivals will actually touch on this. I hope they didn't just blow up the Almighty to get rid of it, move on, and forget about it. The next major portion of this season was the return of Trials of Osiris, And to be fair, the return of Trials is arguably the largest boon to the hardcore PvP community since the launch of Forsaken. Competitive mode was a loss because of the pinnacle weapon grind. It was exceedingly difficult to maintain engagement throughout the community for that period of time you needed to have to be successful at comp. Trials of Osiris with 3v3 and random rolls and not double primaries was a great mode at the surface, and I argue that it still is. I know for a fact that it brought a lot of people back to Destiny, and for some, Trials defines the Destiny experience for many. This is another reason why all those people who are saying, Bungie, just get rid of PvP, they'd be shooting themselves in the foot if they decided to do PvE content right now. However, the surface of Trials is built on quicksand, much like the same quicksand I believe is the problem with Destiny 2 in general, and that is the token system. Being guardians imbued with the power of light given to us by a machine god, we are undead, and you think you could do better than just to put tokens into a giant machine and it spits out a gun or an armor piece to us. But right now, that's exactly what's happening. Because of this, there's no feeling of accomplishment when you receive a weapon, no way to actually target the thing that you want, and moreover, because of the way it was designed, it has hurt the player population it was intended to help engage. We all know that the incentive is now to farm as many tokens as you can, and once you've unlocked a weapon, so that you can farm that weapon as many times as you can to get the role that you want. Because of that, top tier godly players searching for these ultra mega awesome weapons spent all their time near the bottom of their game space because it was actually easier to get tokens there to actually go flawless. This absolutely shredded the population of people playing Trials more than any problem had before. While the community is excited that they are working on a solution for this next season by pushing more token rewards to the top of the card, I don't think it will actually solve the problem because, again, it's based on the flawed token system. Of course, this season, the other poison to Trials was the amount of cheaters, especially on PC. Even with the addition of DDoS protection through Steam's client, there's still no impactful anti-cheat system in place. Notice that I didn't say that there wasn't an anti-cheat, just not an impactful one. If people are still running cheats after months and months of playing and not getting banned, something has to be changed because no one wants to waste their time in an activity where they can easily be cheated out of their time and hard work. This, combined with the farming of low-end cards, plus the lack of incentive to LFG, plus the lack of incentive for adept weapons, has created the now low Trials population. Trials on the final weekend actually had fewer people playing over an entire weekend than Gambit did in one day over said weekend. Just to give you some numbers, over 1 million players logged in during the first weekend of Trials. On the last weekend, 89,000. That's a loss of over 90% of the player population in Trials. And of course, for those top players, like I said earlier, after Flawless and earning your Flawless seal, what is the incentive? God roll weapons, farm tokens. Better rolled armor, farm tokens. So the only way to deal with it is to farm those lower levels. That's the fastest and most impactful way to do it. There are some simple solutions to this that I would offer as a suggestion. Tie the wins and the drops together to the card itself. So for example, you make it so that every time you want to get a shotgun, you have to get to 3 wins on the card. And if you want to get this sniper, go 5 wins on the card, whatever you want to do. Put weapons in the upper echelon of the card, so maybe like 5 and 7 wins, or maybe even at Flawless. Keep the tokens in place for those people who maybe are still working on getting to Trials, but maybe have the focus be to play the mode itself instead of just farming tokens to earn those targeted weapons. Many in the community were greatly excited at the premise of new things to do in the Guardian Games spring event. The idea of an Olympic stakes Guardian competition to stir things up was something that most people were excited for. And then we found the truth. It was just a bounty simulator, playing the same old content and dumping more materials into another Guardian vending machine. This generated a lack of interest throughout the community, and it was clear that on the second day, There was no reason to do it unless if you wanted to get the heir apparent machine gun. It was great to see the Titans win, but many in the community couldn't help note that there were a lot of missed opportunities here. Instead of playing the same old content, why not try something different? Even though many people say that the Infinite Forest is overused, maybe you use it in a different way for this kind of an event. Maybe you do a relay race. Maybe you get into a fire team of 3 versus another fire team of 3 and see how fast you can all move. Maybe you do a damage race where you see how many enemies you can damage. By doing that, it creates more of an incentive to compete rather than just go do more of the same old thing. Another use could also be a sparrow racing time. For example, maybe you have lights set up around the Exodus crash area and let people run their sparrows there, so you have kind of like a mini sparrow racing course. The community was also confused because heir apparent as an exotic didn't really belong in this activity. It wasn't themed correctly, it didn't have anything to do with Guardian games, and it would have been better suited for something like a secret mission or a quest, a Cabal gun for Cabal activity. Exotics used to come from those themed events or quest lines. For example, in Destiny 1, the Vex Mythoclast came from a Vex raid. It just makes sense. All in all, it comes down to one thing that the community wants to communicate to Bungie. Bounties are not content. It's something that you do on the side to help progress your character. And from that, we learned nothing new was learned from Guardian games. Nothing was gained except for a new exotic, which was haphazardly placed, and a statue next to Zavala. It could have been a really good event, but instead became a microcosm of the entire season. Next up is the Grandmaster Nightfalls, which I particularly enjoyed. It was touted as an activity to do once per nightfall to earn a special Conqueror seal. While it wasn't a complete win for the community, I don't think it was a loss either. Some adjustments to the activity could have turned it into a top-end activity that people would have run continuously if they felt up to the challenge. Right now, there's just a lack of incentive. The seal is basically the only reward. No exotics, no better roles, only the title. Capstone grind is fine for those people who are wondering what a capstone grind is. It's basically you completed everything in the game and maybe you're working on your builds and maybe doing 1 or 2 things at the upper echelon of the content. But there's really no reason to do it. Why not make it so that if you complete a Grandmaster Nightfall, why not make it so you can earn an exotic piece of armor that's curated, completely leveled out, really high stats? Why don't you make sure that it generates an exotic weapon that they don't have? It wouldn't have broken the game because it basically acts the same way as Zerd does, and players would be more apt to do it if they could farm for specific rewards. Upgrade materials are not enough incentive, especially for upper echelon players. For many, the meta of this season, tied with the artifact and the mods that came from it, created an inability to combat champions if you did not have certain weapons. Ariana's Vow basically became a necessary piece of kit, but for those who didn't play Shadowkeep or Season of the Undying, they had no opportunity to earn the weapon. Why not make it an exotic quest from Eris instead of locked behind the season pass? It would have made more sense story-wise and would have given players an opportunity to earn it outside of the Undying season pass. Even though I love the difficulty, the ability and the speed of enemies to kill was insane. Sometimes you'd peek around a corner, you had no idea an enemy was there, and it was an instant death. When you got hit with one shot, there's no opportunity to move to cover, have another player engage, plan, or anything else like that. Sometimes it was just dumb luck. While I did start to become more careful, dumb luck should never be a game mechanic a player should have to deal with. I'd go back in if the rewards were adjusted though, as my crew and I had a lot of fun getting those things taken care of, deciding which enemies to kill, kind of progressing through it more like a raid and being strategic. That was actually a lot of fun. This is the longest reflection video I've ever made on YouTube, and there's a reason for that. I love Destiny to the core. Some of my friends say probably too much, but I love this game. I love the way it feels. I love the music. I love everything inside of it, but this season is the first season I actually felt incentivized not to play. This season seemingly had some amazing story and lore inside of it though. The Almighty, the rise of Rasputin, the story of Felwinter, and the true cause of the Siva threat. However, Bungie has failed to realize what the stories I mentioned at the beginning of this included. Even though the history of Middle-earth shaped the story of Lord of the Rings, and that there is a huge mythos behind the story of Star Wars, it's not about that history. It's not its main story. It's not its main engagement. The reason why we connected to those books is because of the stories of Frodo, Aragorn, Gandalf, Luke Skywalker, Leia, Han Solo, the encounters inside of the story. And this is what Bungie has forgotten. Lore cards are nothing when there is no compelling gameplay to go along with it. Bungie has succeeded at doing this in the past, and that's why the community is frustrated. With the Taken King, Forsaken, the Reckoning season, I actually like the Reckoning season because I like Gambit Prime. But Destiny at those moments was at its best because the lore and the story that we were in aligned. We went into the world created by this amazing lore and we interacted with it. When we fought orcs, when we realized the history of the Hive, the ascent of orcs to the Taken King, Mara Sov's relationship to Riven, how the Shattered Throne story played out, all of those things were impactful and meant a lot to the gameplay. On the eve of the next season and the upcoming revelation of the next chapter of Destiny 2, I have come to the following conclusions about this season. They decided to give this season, which was poised to be an amazing season, full of story engagement, very low bandwidth and resources. They did that because they wanted to push everything to the fall and the summer. Compared to every other season in Destiny, this was the weakest. There was no raid, no new activity. All of the content was essentially repackaged and recycled. For example, Trials, there was no new maps. All the weapons are reskins of D1 weapons. The Seraph towers are essentially forges. Yes, Curse of Osiris was better. Curse had a story, access to the Infinite Forest, new strikes, new Trials weapons when it was Trials of the Nine, and a new raid. It was only hobbled by the fact that we had a double primary system without random rolls. Compared to this season, Curse of Osiris is better, but not by much. There were glimpses of greatness, of course, in the Felwinter storyline, the Almighty Conclusion event, the Grandmaster difficulty Nightfalls. My expression to the devs, who I know are working tirelessly while the world is on fire, is to remember why we as a community play the game. We want to play the game. We don't want to play the game from 2 years ago with the same content from 2 years ago. We don't want to do the same thing from 2 years ago. We want something new. And I know you can't always deliver it, but the community needs something like that. We want to chart a journey, go on an adventure, learn about the world that we're all so passionate about, or at least not get farmed for 3 stupid Trials tokens. I want Destiny to succeed. I really do. But right now, I am going in with the lowest expectations for a Destiny release ever. And frankly, so is the community. Most people are interested in either older content, for example, Whisper and Outbreak. I've done more of those on stream than ever before. And also, more people are just waiting till the next season comes out. I'm hoping that Bungie decided to go low bandwidth with this season for a reason. To make fall and the summer of 2020 the greatest times in Destiny 2's history. Luke Smith himself made the comment on Twitter that this summer will be unlike any time in Destiny. That tweet was meant to grab attention, to say you'd better be ready because something is coming. And I hope it is. I want it to be, because after this season, anything different would be better than what we've had. Good hunting, Guardians. I'll see you next time in the universe of Destiny.